Welcome to Leaders in the Arena. My name is Jenny Whitener, and I'm the Executive Director for the Brock Barnes Center for Leadership. Leaders in the Arena is about real stories, hard-earned insights, and practical guidance from leaders doing the work of leadership in the arena. This program is brought to you by the Brock Barnes Center for Leadership, where we have a focus to equip servant leaders to faithfully build institutions and communities in Christ's work of making all things new. We do that through four major capabilities: our Institute for Student Leadership, our Institute for Innovation and Impact, the Institute for Executive Education, and our Wisdom and Insight series, which brings me to today's program. Today, our very special guest is Eric Sonnenschein. He is a rising senior here at Covenant College, a McClellan Scholar, also an intern with the Brock Barnes Center for Leadership, and a triple major. And I'm sure he's going to tell us much more about that hard work ahead. We're going to be talking today about forming servant leaders, specifically focused on courage and stewardship. Welcome, Eric. Thank you for being with us. Maybe start us off telling us a little bit more about yourself and your own personal journey.
Sweet. Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, what a privilege it is to be able to jump on the Leaders in the Arena podcast, and just grateful to be here. So for a little bit of background about myself, I'm born and raised in Chicago, Illinois, but the family recently relocated down to Knoxville, Tennessee, as you can see by the little introductory photo. At Covenant College, I am studying economics, finance, and accounting, and I'm also was blessed to be a part of the McClellan Scholarship, which is a Christian leadership scholarship, and really has been such a formative part about my time at Covenant. Independent of my studies, historically, I played on the men's varsity soccer team, and I love to be involved on campus. I'm on the leadership team for the Business and Economics Club. I am an admissions ambassador. And most recently, the newest gig has been interning at the Brock Barnes Center for Leadership.
You are busy. You are busy. Thank you for
Try to.
bringing us in. I know this is a heavy lift, especially during finals as we're finishing up this season for the academic year. Our topic today, it's really special for us at Brock Barnes, this concept of servant leadership, and two of the major capabilities in servant leadership have to do with courage and stewardship. And so today I was hoping that you could help us bring that student perspective to life. Talk to me a little bit about how courage and stewardship together help shape trust and credibility and really give long-term impact. Give us your perspective on that.
Yeah, of course. And I think just before we dive right in, it'd be important to say I'm a rising senior in college. Compared to some of the other guests we've had on, they have 30 years of experience. And so hopefully, as the Leaders in the Arena podcast continues to have a strong life, I hope to come back and share an alternate perspective. But
Absolutely.
today, it's going to be fun sharing this from a 21-year-old's perspective. So, yeah, touching on that first question, I think courage and stewardship are what make leadership trustworthy, but also lasting. So I think if you look at them independently, courage without stewardship can feel reckless or self-serving at times. I'm being bold and I'm going to do this, and it feels more inward or self-focused. But then on the flip, stewardship without courage can feel passive or ineffective. When you bring them together, they create leaders people actually can trust. And so I think it's important. When I was thinking through this question a little bit, three pillars stuck out to me about how they're going to shape impact: trust, credibility, and then also long-term impact. So first, trust. Um, People follow leaders who are willing to act and who are genuinely care about what they are given. And so there's a difference between, I think people can see that genuine side really quickly. And, people can sense, does someone truly care? And that builds trust. I think the second piece would be credibility, about saying the hard things and doing the right things. And that builds respect. But I think it's important to preserve people and culture in that. And one fun story that I just was thinking about is at the beginning of our internship at the Brock Barnes Center, one of our core things we talked about was talking straight. And in previous roles I've held, I think as an intern, you're a little bit shy or a little bit worried about, pushing people or swinging people the wrong ways of being too bold. But I think that's been one of the most valuable parts of this internship is when, we see something, when we hear something, we talk straight to each other, and that really builds credibility. And then I think the last thing is that long-term impact. And I think courage drives action in the moment, but then stewardship ensures those actions don't damage the future. And so I think that's how I break it up into those three sections.
Fantastic. I love the fact that you have combined courage and stewardship and helped us to see how important those are woven together. And if you take them separately, there could be some danger in that.
Right.
So fantastic. I also hear you um, from a student perspective saying it's really important for the leaders that you're engaged with that they model these consistently so that
That's
you feel
right.
confident that those behaviors shape that trust and build trust over time. So, big shout out to you for those insights. And I hope that leaders who are listening to us today take those to heart. Let's go a little further on this concept of courage and stewardship, and talk to me about what it means to act with conviction. There are many times that we get under pressure, and I'm sure you felt that way even as a student from time to time, where you're in a certain situation or you're in
Mhm.
high pressure situations. What does it mean to act with conviction during those times?
Yeah, I think courage is choosing what's right, even when it's uncomfortable, uncertain, or could be costly for you. And, some of the tangible ways I've seen this in my work experience or as a student is speaking up when it'd be easier to stick with the status quo or just stay silent. Making decisions when you don't have perfect clarity. There's going to be times you have to do that. And then taking responsibility for actions, even when the outcomes aren't guaranteed. And I think one important nuance to touch on that I've learned since being at my time at Covenant is courage isn't always loud or dramatic. It's not the loudest, the most bold, the most direct person in the room, but often it's quiet, relational, and can be rooted in some of those core values you have. And then lastly, it shows up in consistency, not just in big moments. Courage shouldn't be something that's impulsive in the big moments, but something that's an underlining in how you live in a day-to-day life.
That's interesting. You talked about the fact that as a student at Covenant, you talked about
Mhm.
that, um, acting with conviction and in certain situations. Just, veering off just a moment from our plan, I wonder how your faith, how sort of Covenant's emphasis on building your faith and shaping that
Mhm.
at the same time you're building academic, how does that equip you to act with conviction?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest takeaways I've had since being at Covenant is there's going to be situations in work, in relationships, in school, in the church, where you're going to be put in tough situations and you're going to have courage and conviction. But one of the most important nuances I've learned is that you have to pre-think about how you're going to respond and how you're going to act before you ever get into those rooms. Because there's going to be time in a fallen world where pressure and temptations and motivations are going to want to swing you elsewhere. But I think it's important to be grounded and rooted in scripture and faith about how you are going to approach those situations before you get there. So,
Right.
for one example, I'm looking to go down the high finance route, and although that's not known as usually the purely most Christian atmosphere, there's a lot of secular influences. I'm already having to start having these thoughts and these conversations, and this is time to pray with the Lord about when I get put in these situations that it might not be clear or I feel a little bit uncomfortable by. How am I going to respond? I'm not going to respond impulsively, but rather calculated based on the things I've thought and rooted in my faith. That's, a big part of who I am.
Right. I love it. I love it. And the call out for us, I think, hearing you speak about this is importance of being scripturally based and
Hmm.
going to the Lord in prayer when we have these situations. And very wise comments. So, talk to me a little bit more about how leaders develop confidence. You've talked to me about how you approach things with conviction when
Hmm.
it's tough. How do you build confidence to take a step forward when it matters most?
Right. I think we'll touch on this a little bit more later as well, but I might be a little bit different than some. I do believe that leaders are born and you're naturally born with leadership. But on the flip side of that, I believe that you have to hone that leadership, you have to develop that leadership and to become a better leader. And so I think one of the first things is that those clarity of values. You can't act with conviction if you don't know what you stand for. And that goes back to that pre-thinking and spending that time slowing down about who I am and what do I stand for. I think the second thing is small reps. Courage goes through small everyday decisions, not just this big one of, this or that of life-changing events, but taking small tangible steps on a day-by-day basis. I think the
Right.
third thing is experience under pressure. The more you face these hard situations, the more confidence you're going to build. And I think last is trusting in something bigger. And I think that's for me is my faith. Sometimes I like to say my big why. What's my purpose behind all this? And I think it helps stabilize me and ground me when things become uncertain.
Yeah, I love this mental imagery that I'm getting when you're
Yeah,
talking about building courage, like small reps, you
right.
know, sort of like grounded in your faith. It's like there's
Mhm.
nothing I can't do if I'm constant and consistent and building
Right.
courage. Like it just continues to grow, just like I personally grow. Like it's just a part of who we are with intentionality. When you think about leadership as a responsibility,
hmm
um, how do you think about that as a student, and how would you maybe expand that a little bit to leaders that you'll be working with? So, what is leadership as a responsibility?
Yeah. Um, I think it's interesting because we see leadership and you see it as a role or as a title, and there's that temptation to really get come to that prestige or that power. But I think leadership isn't about owning. It's being entrusted with something that isn't ultimately yours. I think that's really tying into that servant leadership piece. And I think this is something I've wrestled with my entire life, of whether being a captain on a soccer team or leading on a group project or a community service initiative. And you have to get away from that. This isn't mine to control, but this is mine to care well for. And I think as a type A person, as most leaders are, and for the other, viewers and listeners out there, we're probably more type A and we're more driven and we want to control, but rather this is something we should care for. So not control, but care. And um, I think that's the biggest piece, is it's not ours, it's really the Lord's that we have been entrusted with.
I mean, I think, you know, letting the Lord own it, right? And asking for guidance along the way, how powerful that is for us.
Mhm.
And I think that's really strong wisdom for us. What other things can you share with me about this area?
Yeah, I think there's kind of three pieces. So my mind is I'm finance, accounting, that's where I go. And one of the coolest things that Covenant College has done recently is every year they take a group of students to a conference in Orlando, the Kingdom Advisors Conference titled Redeeming Money. And I think that's the first thing we think about when we hear the word stewardship, right? Resources such as your time or money and opportunities. I think that's important. But two other things I think are important to note are both people and culture. We have to steward those well as well. So for people, right? Whether in my context, if I'm, working on a group project or other people in my McClellan Scholars cohort, you want to steward their growth, their well-being, their dignity well. Looking on the flip from a culture's perspective from the Brock Barnes Center or Covenant College, you want to steward our values, standards, and the environment well. So I think it's easy for us to think, oh, stewardship and faith and stewardship, how does that align? That's purely resources, time, money, opportunities. But I think we can also look at this from a people and culture's perspective.
Right. So fantastic. Um, I think that, you know, as we go further into our discussion today, I wanted you to talk to me a little bit more about the intentionality, like in building leadership, that
Mhm.
um, how do you just not kind of coast through the process of becoming a leader,
Yeah.
but really be intentional about it? Talk to me more about that.
Yeah, so kind of as I mentioned before, I do believe leaders are born, but more importantly, those gifts must be developed over time through intentional development and real responsibility. And I think experience alone isn't enough because people can repeat mistakes without that growth. And I think maybe for some of the younger listeners out here, the biggest thing that's helped me progress throughout school and in my work career so far is curiosity, coachability, and ability to implement that feedback. So I think a lot of people get feedback and see it as criticism. I get feedback and see it as an opportunity. And I think someone who welcomes that and wants to learn and then is able to rapidly implement those teaching points is going to be someone who thrives and grows. And it's been something that's been super helpful for me thus far. I think
Well,
another piece
yeah, go
is just
ahead.
internal development, not just that external opportunity. So you will have those external opportunities, but it's also about forming and shaping yourself in a way that's going to prepare yourself for those opportunities. And so I think those are the two big things.
Well, I was going to say probably you'd hit some good debate if you were to go into an open room and say, "Are leaders born? Are they made?" Right?
Oh
That's
yeah.
a, at least I get your point. And I think also your concept about, you know, really pursuing it intentionally in terms of going after development. And I think today I wanted to just kind of weave in our new program here at Covenant that we're launching called the Leadership Fellows. It's a student-focused leadership development program, and I know you've been a big part of helping us bring that to life. Anything that you would say in terms of adding to the Covenant portfolio a new 2-semester program on leadership development? How well do you think that will be received by students?
Oh, it's phenomenal. And I think a few words to describe it. It's a blessing, it's an opportunity, and it is something I would push every single student to be a part of. This has been something that's been curated over the past year. There's been lots of time, effort, and intentionality in it, and it's well developed. It's going to well equip students, and it's really going to balance those external opportunities with that internal growth. And so it's a great opportunity for students to hone in those leadership abilities, push themselves to situations where they might be a little bit uncomfortable, really do some self-discovery through all of this, and then just opportunities for learn from people, get mentorship. And so, yeah, it's been a huge success so far. There's been over 100 students already expressing interest. We've had even more demand than supply, and so it's been such a blessing. And I think it's just a great piece of adding on to what Covenant views leadership as, and an opportunity for students to really develop those skills.
Great. I'm glad to hear that students are fired up. And I would agree with you. I think just a first, launch of a major student leadership program, 2 semesters, each semester getting 2 hours of credit, that it was overwhelming to get over 100 nominations from faculty and staff for this emerging program. It'll launch in the fall. And as you said, a big part of this first semester, the fall program, is really a deep dive in servant leadership. So we'll be exploring together more in depth the things that you've helped us to unpack today: courage and stewardship, along with humility and integrity, some of the core components of servant leadership. We'll be doing some team building, and we'll be doing some risk taking and courage building along that first semester. We'll be focused on some content called the Leadership Challenge, and exploring DISC and looking at our personality styles and doing a 360 assessment for students. And so a very in-depth program over the fall, and then following that in the spring with a focus on making all things new, building innovation and change management capability for our students. So I'm really keen to see how it goes, and very excited about this additional capability that Covenant's bringing to life through the Brock Barnes Center for Leadership. So thanks for helping me introduce that today. Thanks for giving us a deep dive on courage and stewardship. I think just for our listeners, I would just let you know that we are working to build participation in our student leadership program. You can serve as a sponsor. You could attend our executive roundtables. You can attend some of our kickoff events. So if you'd like to be involved in building student leadership, we would love to have you. And you can find out more at the Brock Barnes Center for Leadership website and learn all about that. Eric, any last comments about courage and stewardship? Any final comments you'd like to share with our audience today?
Sure. I think one last thing to share specifically for students who are going to be watching this. What are like 3 to 4 tangible ways that courage and stewardship are developed? I think the first one I want to touch on is real responsibility. Something has to be at stake. This can't be a simulation or a what if. So I want to encourage and challenge people to put themselves in those situations where something is at stake, because that's where you'll shine and you'll thrive, and most importantly, you'll grow. I think second thing is guidance and feedback. Seek out mentors. You'd be surprised how many people would love, you'd give them a call and they'd say, I'd love to be your mentor. And those are the people who are going to challenge you. They're going to coach you and they're going to want to make you better. I think the third thing is reflection. So often as type A people and students and with all of our extracurriculars, we're going, going, going. Take some time. Turn to prayer. So often we want to go, do, and execute, but why aren't we praying first? Pray and find time to reflect. And then lastly, consistency. This isn't going to be a one-time effort or a one-time conviction. This is something you have to practice throughout, the course of your development and throughout your life. So I think those are my big 4 takeaways, and just a good spot where I can leave things off at.
Great. Well, Eric, thank you for your words of wisdom today. Thank you for all that you're doing at Covenant College, all those that you're touching, and all the leadership that you're bringing to the Covenant College community. I know this summer, your internship in Miami is going to be great. We can't wait to hear more about it. And thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Jenny.
All right. God bless you, Eric. Bye
God
now.
bless. Take care.